Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Romine, and this is the Houston Grass Podcast. We are towards the end of July now, and I can't believe I'm saying that, but here we are. If you stick your head outside, the heat and humidity are a sure reminder. So it has been, we had such a wet June here and all over Texas here the last couple of weeks. The heat has cranked up. At the farm, they've gotten close to 2 inches, and here in Houston, we're less than an inch and a half for the month. And so, obviously, what we want to do in this episode is talk about what those weather conditions mean for our yards as far as watering and mowing and fungicide applications and stuff like that. We are seeing and getting lots of phone calls. I'm seeing signs of fungus from having such a wet June. We are seeing a lot of gray leaf spot, a lot of phone calls about gray leaf spot, also a lot of talk of summer patch. So we're going to talk about some of those things here. We are at the peak of summer here for the next month and a half. Now through August is about as hot and usually dry as we get. I suspect most of our rain comes from the pop-up heat showers in the afternoon or the tropical systems, the lows or whatever that come from the Gulf, and usually that's kind of it. So obviously that has effects on our yards, and there are things that we're going to want to accommodate for to stay on top of all that. So the first thing I want to talk about, obviously, we're going to talk about watering. Watering is critical right now. I can tell you I had my irrigation off a lot of last month because of the rains that we were getting, and to keep the fungus away. You don't want to overwater, but we're getting to the time of year that it's going to be hard to do that other than if you've got a real shady area. What we always advise with established grass is you want to do consistent deep waterings. You want to do ideally 2 1/2-inch waterings per week to make those roots chase that moisture down and create a stronger plant. If you come home at 5 o'clock and you see stressed parts of the yard, blades of grass that are kind of closed up and it looks kind of gray as you look out there, you'd want to increase that watering amount. And of course, everybody wants to know, well, how much water is that? I can tell you that with my water pressure in my neighborhood and the sprinklers that kind of go back and forth like this, I forget exactly what those are called, it took me 2 hours to put out 1/2 of an inch of water. So you've got to do that twice a week. And I will admit that when I was doing that before I had an irrigation system, I was lazy about it. And what I did is I put that sprinkler out there for 4 hours once a week and did it that way. And it worked fine. My soil was fairly alluvial, not super hard and compacted. So it wasn't just all running off. It was absorbing it. If you try to water 4 hours and your front yard's on a slope and it's really hard dirt or something like that, and you're just running it off in the street, that's not doing any good. Obviously you got to get it to absorb, so that will kind of determine that. Now I will say, what about an irrigation system? It really depends on what type of heads you have. I can tell you the way mine is set up, and by the way, the best way to determine all of this, no matter what method you're using, is to stick rain gauges out there randomly in the yard and find out, because different heads are going to put out different amounts. Of the pop-up and rotor heads, mine are set for 25 or 30 minutes is for twice a week is how long they go. The ones that pop up and are stationary, they don't move back and forth, most of them are set for 12 to 15 minutes, I believe, is how I have those. But again, if you look on those, a lot of those put out different gallons per minute. So obviously that's going to affect the amount of water that they're putting out. So the only way you're really going to know the answer to this question is with a rain gauge. That's what we always suggest. Last year I had a friend call me and they were losing different parts of their yard to chinch bugs, and we couldn't figure out why. Well, yeah, we're watering 3 days a week. We've cranked the water up, and we still have these dead areas. And I went out there, and sure enough, it's chinch bugs. I said, well, let's turn the irrigation system on, and we did that. And the irrigation system had really poor coverage. There were parts of the yard that were barely getting a little mist. There were parts of the yard that weren't getting anything. Just because you're running the irrigation system doesn't mean all parts of the yard are getting an equal amount of water. And those chinch bugs look for that drought-stressed area. If you've got a place over here that's pretty and lush and getting plenty of water, they're going to stay away from that. They're going to seek out that drought-stressed grass. So you want to be on the lookout for that. You do want to avoid nighttime watering. That is usually just a recipe for disease this time of year. When we get real hot and humid, that's when we see gray leaf spot and summer patch. So best time of day to water is definitely in the mornings, usually probably between like 5 and 9 o'clock in the morning. That way the wind hasn't gotten up, the sun's not real hot, and you're losing it to the wind blowing it around in evaporation. But it does have a chance to do its thing, get in the soil, and then the sun, as it warms up, it evaporates that water off those leaves, which keeps the fungus away. So you do want to be mindful of that. Watering in the sun versus the shade, you're not going to lose as much water out of the soil to evaporation and whatnot when you've got big shade trees over the top of it, especially if you have palmetto planted out there in some of those shadier areas. Grass that's planted in the shade is just more susceptible to some of these funguses that we're talking about. You would water a little bit less than the rest of those, just because the grass is not going to be as stressed in those areas. Mowing is another thing that needs to be addressed when it gets really hot like this. We've talked about this for the last few months. We lose those moderate temperatures from spring, and when we start warming up, we start suggesting that you increase that mowing height. Right now, you're probably at 4.5 inches on St. Augustine. The zoysias and Bermudas are probably a little bit shorter, especially the fine-bladed zoysias. But you want to increase all of those over what they are in spring and fall to try to retain some of that moisture. It's obviously less stress on the grass. You have more plant tissue shading that soil to keep that moisture in that soil there. Rule of thumb, no matter what time of year it is, never cut off more than 1/3 of the leaf tissue at a time, which means mowing a minimum of once a week. If you're doing your job and you are fertilizing right, you're watering right, and mowing right, you have to be mowing at least once a week, because if you're doing those things and your yard is healthy, you would be cutting off way more than 1/3 of the leaf tissue. If you're, say, waiting every other week or every 10 days to cut that yard, you're going to be cutting more like half of the leaf tissue off, and that's very stressful to the grass this time of year when it gets this hot. Sharp lawnmower blades are a must. I can't stress enough, when people send us pictures of yards, and we always ask for some close-up pictures, and it looks like the tops of the grass have been chewed off, or somebody used a weed eater or a weed trimmer to trim the grass with, because it's ripped off and you can see the jagged edges across the top. You want a good clean cut across the top, and those sharp lawnmower blades give you that. It gives it a better look. You don't see all those brown tips, and it also helps seal that blade of grass off and not open it as up to fungus and stuff as much as it does when you cut it with a blunt blade. So leaving the clippings is a good idea this time of year. So you would want to use a mulch blade. Obviously, you don't want to leave an excess amount of them out there. If there's piles out there, you're going to eventually kill the grass underneath there. That also means you waited too long to mow the grass as well. So leaving those clippings helps return some nitrogen to the soil, and it also kind of helps shade that soil a little bit too. It's kind of like mulch for your yard there. All things to consider. Fertilization, you should have done either the weed and feed or the Nitro-Phos Imperial in the spring. Early June, you put out the Nitro-Phos Super Turf, the 19410. It's a silver bag. And in the fall, we will be looking at using the fall special. If you either did that Super Turf really early in May or you missed that fertilization, it is okay to use the Super Turf this time of year. That would help it get it through the rest of this summer when it's so tough. It is a slow release nitrogen in it. That means that instead of getting that burst of green and that big injection of nitrogen in the soil, which can damage the turf this time of year because it's so hot, that nitrogen can make that an issue. The thing about the Super Turf is half of its nitrogen is encapsulated in this slow release stuff that slowly breaks down over time, so you don't get that. Instead of the fertilizer doing its thing and it lasts about a month, this stuff lasts like 3 months, so it lasts longer. It also is not as susceptible to burning the grass with that big hit of nitrogen. So regardless, when you're fertilizing this time of year, I can't jump up and down enough on the fact that you need to water it in real well. One of those half-inch waterings needs to be applied immediately after or within 24 hours of you putting out fertilizer like that. You also don't want to over fertilize this time of year for another reason other than burning the grass. That excess nitrogen can spur on fungus growth, so you got to be careful, especially the gray leaf spot. You can certainly call and pick our brains. We do stock all of the Nitro-Phos fertilizers. We try to only keep the one in stock that you need for that time of year. So if you came to us right now and said, hey, I'm ready, I want to get this stuff to stock up for fall, we don't have it yet. I talked to Nitro-Phos a couple of days ago, and they won't even start manufacturing that one until probably early August. So and that's more of a September fertilizer. So we do have what you need in stock as far as fertilizers go. Other than that, as far as summer goes, just some general monitoring goes a long way. Walking through your yard, if you have somebody mowing your yard, you may not, it's so hot outside, a lot of people probably come home from work, go right into the air condition and stay out of this heat. So it is good to get out and walk the yard every once in a while and make sure you don't see those hot spots that could be signs of chinch bugs or just anything unusual that you're not used to seeing, because a lot of these things are early action, can save you a lot of grass and therefore a lot of money. These chinch bugs, if you recognize them fast enough and hit them with the insecticide that we mentioned, you can stop a lot of the mass damage that they can do. So, and the same goes for sod webworms. If you get out there and see the areas they've eaten down flat, that's obviously something we're going to talk about here next. Just early detection helps a lot of these things. So that is getting out there and checking it out and kicking around in the grass a little bit is how you do that. So that does take us into our next section here. We'll talk more specifically about what I think we're going to talk about 4 of the main issues that come up this time of year. First one that comes to mind, and the thing that we've talked about most so far this summer, is gray leaf spot, the fungus gray leaf spot. Because it was wet in June, the conditions were just perfect for it, so we got a lot of calls about gray leaf spot. It is a fungus that kind of thrives in the hot, humid, and rainy weather, and it's a big problem for St. Augustine in our part of the world, especially that in shadier areas. Not only because the shade itself can kind of cause it, because sunnier areas, the sun kind of every day bakes that area and dries those areas out, and so the gray leaf spot fungus doesn't thrive as much in those areas as the shady areas where it stays wet longer. So that kind of brings it about. And normally you also put palmetto in those areas, and for whatever reason it's just a little more susceptible to that gray leaf spot. And over watering your yard too is definitely something that can bring that about. Signs of gray leaf spot are if you look at the individual blades of grass and you see maybe a dot the size of the end of a pin here. It looks like a little freckle, a brown spot on the green blade, and usually there's multiple of those, and left untreated, what eventually happens is the whole blade of grass turns brown and it just goes away. What you want to do to prevent that is first avoid overwatering, especially in the shadier areas, and water in the mornings. Don't be watering in the evenings or at night. Also avoiding putting off a lot of excess fertilizer out there. Those are the ingredients that it takes to kick that stuff off. So avoiding it goes a long ways. If you do see those little brown spots show up, you would want to treat with Heritage G. We're going to talk about Heritage G. It is such good stuff. Heritage G treats gray leaf spot well. It stops summer patch as well and brown patch as well. So Heritage G is just a good one to keep in your garage, so you've got it on hand to do it. So what you would do if you saw the start of gray leaf spot, you'd put out an application of the Heritage G. It doesn't take much. It's a real small granule, so it comes out of your spreader really fast. You just follow the directions on the bag. You would also want to do a second application 2 to 3 weeks later, and that should put the brakes on most of these things. You would kind of want to focus your attention on, again, we talked about those shadier areas, like low-lying areas in your yard that don't dry out as much. Those are where usually this gray leaf spot is going to start. So as a matter of fact, that when we're going to talk about brown patch and summer patch and all those, it's usually those are the same areas that because they all kind of need the same ingredients. They need that nitrogen, they need that moisture, and a little bit of shade helps them go a long ways as well. So what I was getting at earlier as far as the shade goes is that If a grass gets gray leaf spot in a real sunny area, it's not as big of a deal because Mother Nature, once you back off the water or it quits raining or whatever, it can recuperate. Where there is danger of losing grass is in the shade, because if you start to lose that grass and it doesn't recuperate as well in the shade, you start to lose those grass blades, and I guess maybe there's not as much plant material, the leaves exposed to the sun to gather sunlight, and in the shade, that's when you can get wiped out with gray leaf spot. So being real attentive to those shady areas is important. Another thing that I have mentioned already here is summer patch fungus. Summer patch also appears this time of year. It's often confused with brown patch, but you're like, well, it can't be brown patch. I know brown patch only thrives when we've got cool nights and warmer days in those transition times of the year. Fall when it's worse, but also early spring as well. So it looks like brown patch, except a lot of times brown patch is in pretty nice circles and has pretty well defined edges. Summer patch looks like it. The grass looks the same, gets that yellow sickly kind of color, but it's not that distinct pattern. It can be kind of a random pattern, not circular, but takes over large areas overnight is what it happens, and it can kind of look like drought stress or nutrient deficiency or something like that. It needs the same conditions, the warm humid conditions as the gray leaf spot, and that's what kind of kicks it off. To prevent it, you just like we talked about with gray leaf spot, trying to avoid overwatering and improving your drainage where you can do that, and not dumping on too much fertilizer. To treat it, again, the Heritage G does great. It's effective as it is with gray leaf spot. You apply it as soon as you see those ugly patches, and then you do it again 2 to 3 weeks later. And I did mention earlier that it's a granular, so it's got to be watered in right after you put it out, just like fertilizer or any other granular product that you put out. So that's what activates it, gets it down to the soil and stuff like that. It's not normally as aggressive as brown patch, so it doesn't spread as rapidly as brown patch, but if it can be managed if caught early, and then you don't get the big ugly brown scars in your yard that have to recuperate. Like I said, that Heritage G is good stuff for lots of reasons, and it can save you on that one. Now we'll talk about some bugs. We've talked about funguses here. We're going to talk about chinch bugs now. I suspect strongly, now that we have gotten hot and we are getting dry, the rain kind of saved us from chinch bugs so far, but as we dry out, I totally expect the phone to start ringing and the pictures to start coming in of, hey, what's going on with my yard? It looks like I'm not watering, but I am. And that's what you're looking for when you've got chinch bugs. It looks like a hot spot in the yard. It's usually where concrete meets, say, a sidewalk and a driveway, because that heat from those two things radiates onto those corners, and that's usually where it starts. And chinch bugs are just going to follow up. They're looking for the drought-stressed grass. So like we talked about, wherever the drought stress starts in the yard, that's where they're going to start. How do you kind of identify them? Well, they look like a little gnat. If you see those drought stressed areas, it's best to get down on your hands and knees on the edges. There's probably going to be already a dead area in the middle, but if you move out to the edge and kind of part the grass and look down in it, you'll see what look like little gnats, little black bugs crawling around in it. The telltale sign is as they cross their wings on their backs, that their wingtips are white, so it makes a little white X on their back. So that's how you can kind of distinguish them from some other things. As chinch bugs eat, they kill the grass. They inject a toxin into it as they eat it, and it's just like Roundup. It kills it. There is no coming back from those areas, and so those areas will have to be replaced. Therefore, it is best to detect them early and spray them, get rid of them before they have a chance to do real damage. We talked about getting out just looking for the bugs. I have never done it personally, but they talk about taking a coffee can or something similar and cutting the bottom of it out, kind of twisting it down in the dirt a little bit, and then filling it up with a little bit of soapy water, and those bugs will kind of float up is what they do. That is another way to detect them. So how do we prevent them? turn on the water, turn on that irrigation system. Do not let areas do the things that we've talked about earlier in this video. Do not let your yard dry out. Make sure you're getting 100% coverage with your sprinkler. And if we're not getting any help from Mother Nature as far as rain goes, make sure you're staying on top of that water, getting at least that 1 inch of water per week, because they're looking for that drought stress grass. And if your neighbor's not watering and you are, they will absolutely pass up the lush green grass and go to that drought stress grass. As far as treatment goes, we do sell a product called Cyonara that attaches to the end of a hose. It's a little bottle that screws on the end of your hose, and you just kind of spray it out there. It's real easy to do. I tell everybody what I do is start in the far corner of your yard with your hose stretched all the way out, and you just kind of walk backwards, fanning it back and forth to spray them. And you're probably going to have to do it a couple of times. It works great. And the liquids are definitely the way to go as opposed to granular, because you get that instant kill from it. You do need to do it a couple of times. 4 or 5 days later is what I would suggest spraying it again, because you're not going to probably get every one of them, and then they can kick back off again. But you do need to be vigilant of that. Sayonara is the thing that we sell. There are others out there that would probably be just as fine, as long as it lists chinch bugs on the label. You'd probably be fine. But I do suggest the hose in ones that you can spray out there. That seems to do the best, and it's the most foolproof. If you do have chinch bugs and you do spray them, your yard does stand a chance at recovering. If they're left unattended too long and the areas get big, what normally we see come back is just Bermuda grass, the common Bermuda grass. It kills all the St. Augustine in an area, and then common Bermuda grass is just what comes up in our part of the world. If you've got some bare dirt, common Bermuda grass is what's going to come up. So you will have to replace those areas. Even if you do treat them relatively quickly, sometimes they do their damage really quick, and you might have to replace those small parts. But better a little section of the yard than the whole yard for sure. So another insect that we'll talk about that is just as easy to kill, but identification is different, is sod webworms. They are a little green caterpillar that comes out at night, and they chew the blades of grass. If you go out in your yard in the morning and it looks like someone has chewed on your grass, it looks like somebody takes a weed eater or weed trimmer and just sets it down real quick and does a real bad job of cutting it. Those jagged edges we were talking about with a dull lawnmower blade, it kind of looks like that, because what they do is come up out of the thatch layer at night and they work around their the little tunnel, and they cut those blades of grass off and take them back down and eat them. So that's kind of how you identify it. The first sign of those before you see any damage is if you walk out in your yard in the morning or the evenings in the cool parts of the day, cool for Houston part of the day, is the brown moths will fly up out of the grass. They're little bitty brown moths that you can see, and as they flutter around, they drop those eggs. Then the larvae come from those eggs, and that is what comes out and will eventually eat your grass. So if you see the moths, you know that you need to go ahead and start spraying with the Sayonara so that you can get on top of those. Sod webworms are another one of those things, kind of like some of these other issues. The funguses, they're not as big of a deal in sunnier areas, because if you go ahead and kill them, that grass is going to still get plenty of sun because it's not in the shade, and it's probably going to recuperate. If you leave sod webworms unattended in a shadier area where there is already a lack of sunlight, and then you cut all that leaf tissue off, there's nothing left to grab the little bit of sunlight that there is. You will probably lose that grass in shadier areas. So that is another good reason to keep on top of them. Detection, like I said, you look for those moths or the uneven cut grass, but you could go out there at night with a flashlight, especially when there's a heavy dew and you can see the worms working. And in the mornings, you'll go out there when there's still that heavy dew, and they leave a web, like a spider web, over the top of their little places, so you can see the dew sticking to those webs that look just like spider webs over the top of the grass. So that's how you know for sure that you do have those. And preventing them, there's not much you can do. Unlike chinch bugs that look for stressed grass that's not in great shape, sod webworms look for the healthiest, greenest grass that they can find. So the person that's taking best care of their grass and watering and fertilizing has the green, lush grass. That's the grass that they look for. So you want to just monitor, look for the moths, look for the uneven cut areas in the mornings, and if you see it, answer is still the same. You put the Cyonara on the end of your hose. Because we are talking about eggs, some of this stuff is only going to kill the larva. It's not going to kill the eggs, so you're going to have to wait till those eggs hatch. So you may have to do 2 or 3 treatments to get all of them. So Cyonara or something else, again, that mentions sod webworms, the secret is identifying it quickly and treating it quickly so that you don't lose grass, especially like we talked about in those shadier areas. That's kind of the issues for this time of year. Please feel free to call us, send us pictures is ideal. We are happy to help identify what we can, but obviously this video kind of answers. When in doubt, Cyonara or Heritage G. We do have those products. We keep those products on hand year round. There's also the Wisdom granular insecticide that we carry. You don't get the instant kill from a granular, obviously, but it is a good follow-up. So after you spray with the liquids that go on your hose in, it's not a bad idea to follow up with some of these granular, specifically the Wisdom. We also keep whatever Nitro-Phos fertilizer you need for the season on hand as well, and we can tell you when to put it out and how to put it out. One thing we haven't talked about in this video is the Barricade pre-emergent, the Nitro-Phos Barricade pre-emergent. We also keep that on hand. You put that out, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4 times a year. The next application of that, though, is going to be like the September, October time period. So we keep a lot of that on hand as well if you were wanting to get that to be prepared for September, October. The Barricade, of course, is when we say pre-emergent, it keeps the weed seeds from germinating, so the weeds never come up is what you're doing with that. And if you stay on top of those applications throughout the year, it can help keep a lot of those weeds from ever germinating and never becoming a problem. So I think that's about all I have here. Please feel free to give us a call. Our competitors, like the big box stores that only get grass once or twice a week, we keep grass on stock year round. We are not open on Saturdays anymore. Spring has passed, and we stayed open through June this year because there was some demand for it. But now that it's gotten really hot, it is hard to keep grass. It only lasts about 36 hours from the time that it's put on the pallet till it starts turning yellow. Obviously, we are only in the business of selling grass, so people know that. We are constantly rotating our inventory, and we don't keep a ton of it on hand, so we can keep it as fresh and green as we can. If you look at a lot of the big box stores, if they even have grass this time of year, it is in really bad shape just because it is so hot and so humid that it just doesn't last long. And so we work really hard at turning our inventory over. So we do have grass. We will have grass here every day throughout the year. So if you've got any questions about grass or products needed to keep that grass pretty, please feel free to give us a call, and we'll be here to answer your questions. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in August.